Hello and welcome to the final one of our Advent conversations. We've made it all the way through to our fourth week, and this week we're talking about hope. I've got with me my good friend Reverend Peat. Now, Mike and I were also at university at King's London, so you've had a few of my King's friends I know in these conversations. Mike is a Baptist minister, and he and I also had the pleasure of working together on some shared projects when I was chaplain at Royal Holloway, and he is the Free Church chaplain at Bristol University, which has a very nice chaplaincy building with a kitchen, which I'm very jealous of still. But anyway, welcome, Mike, and thank you for joining me to talk about hope at this interesting time, both in the church here and in the world around us.
Well, thank you, Kate. It's a pleasure to be with you and to share in your parish life in some way as you go along. It's interesting that you start by talking about the building we had in chaplaincy, because we do feel very privileged, and we often, as chaplains at Bristol, we go and visit other places where chaplains are having to work sometimes in very small spaces, or simply having to kind of hot desk around the university, all of which shapes the ministry you're involved in. I have to say that one of the challenges, and perhaps one of the lessons that we found when the first lockdown struck and we realised that COVID was something that's going to shape all our lives for a long time, I think I got a sense of how dependent we become on having that as a space for gathering people physically and feeding them and doing all those sorts of things which as chaplains we are kind of hardwired into our instincts. And suddenly all that evaporated, and almost everything that we've had to do as chaplains has been remotely. And I think that's taken away a lot of our kind of a lot of the things that were quite foundational to the way in which we built up relationships with staff and students and sort of engaged in the ministry of hospitality. We've had to think of all that quite differently. So initially, I thought, there was a slight feeling of hopelessness, I think, as I sat with our chaplains, what are we going to do if we can't bring people into this building? And we've had to find ways, like everybody else, we've had to find ways online to try and create some semblance of what we were doing in a remote world, and to find hope in the midst of that. So yeah, it does feel very topical to talk about hope when we really had to kind of rethink what do we hope for in terms of the ministry we've had as chaplains over the last 9-10 months.
Yeah, and I think we go through these traditional themes of Advent, don't we, of bringing light into the darkness. And I think for a lot of us, it is that question constantly of how can we be the light in the darkness under the restrictions that we have to live with. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to say we do have a kitchen in All Saints. So, but a bit like you, obviously we've been able to offer our coffee shop in some restricted settings at certain points of the past year. But as we're now in Tier 4, we've had to close the doors of our coffee shop again, which is very much a part of our life, as runs parallel to our worship and our witness that goes on inside the church area in the building. So I mean, how does, I suppose I'm sort of hedging around that question of how do we think about hope in this time where I think a lot of people, even though at one level not much has changed for most of us in the last few days, I think the looking ahead to Christmas and the sense that whatever we thought might happen at Christmas, it probably won't happen in the way that we had been hoping even a few days ago. And so how do we think about hope in that context, I suppose?
Yes, good question. And I think there's something, I mean, to sort of to take a kind of step back and think about, what as Christians we think about hope, and what I think we as Christians think about hope, and then I sort of try and sort of link that into what I've seen going on a bit about me. Is that I suppose the important thing to say about Christianity and hope is that hope is very much linked to the idea of promise and God's promise in Christianity. So whereas other worldviews, other ways of thinking about hope might sort of think, all the hope we can have is, what we can make for ourselves. We hope in human ingenuity. And you hear a lot of that in talking about COVID. Christianity is kind of different from that. On the other hand, and again, I've heard a little bit of this kind of fatalism as well around in COVID time. You can speak about hope as a kind of there's nothing I can do. We just have to hope for the best, or we just, just have to hope for what happens to be. Neither of those are Christian hopes, although there is something about each of them which makes connections with Christian hope is about God's promises. And I've always remembered a line I read once. It was by a philosopher. It's a very easy line to sort of remember and hold on to. Is somebody not speaking about Christianity before, but said, yeah, promises are about creating these islands of security in a world of insecurity. And I think that actually, although it wasn't intended as a Christian statement, is very much a Christian statement about hope. And it's because we have this promise that God will come again that we've been remembering all through Advent, that actually we have that sense of security. We may not know exactly what that looks like or how it's all going to pan out, but that's not that's not the important thing. The important thing is that we have that island of security in all that's around, all the uncertainties around, and that's not a kind of unworldly hope, a kind of pious sort of shutting ourselves away. I think it's that actually then motivates us to want to do things, and it's because we trust in God's future that actually we start to get excited and start to make changes. I've been interested in the way in which, when people have been forced to keep physically apart, there's been a really concerted intentional way in which they kind of resisted it. They wanted to resist it. There's something about, if you like, the uncertainty that's really kind of pushed people in a little way. So the street I live on, for example, we were quick, like many other streets, to set up a Facebook group that would then enable us to sort of get in touch with each other, make sure we all had enough food. If anyone was having to isolate, we could respond to that. But as we got close to Advent, it suddenly became very important. Somebody up the road said, can we please get as many outdoor lights on the fronts of houses as we can? And people have done that, and we've ended up with this very colourful street. And there's something instinctive in human beings to want to kind of resist the adversity and resist, literally sort of associated with darkness, resist that by setting up a lot of lighting. We were very encouraging. At the university, we were determined we'd try and have some sort of carol service, and recognising that we couldn't bring people physically together, we went very much for how do we get as many different kinds of people and groups all around the university to kind of contribute something. We ended up with sort of 7 or 8 different music groups, all sorts of different people reading various things. What people appreciated in the kind of comments that emailed back after this online carol service was released was that we kind of had a go, that we wanted deliberately to try and bring people together in other ways. I think people are that's often where hope is found, where you're inspired by a particular vision about bringing together, and you're determined to have that, even if the circumstances seem to be fighting against it. It kind of mobilizes, if you like. It gets us going.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's something about that sense of hopelessness that you referred to, that what can we do? And I think there can be something helpful in that, in some ways, to remember that actually we don't work out of our own strength, we work out of God's.
Yeah.
And God will find a way for things to be possible. Yeah. We may not be able to see it, and it may take us longer to catch up. There's the old saying, isn't there, about mission being, God's, it's not our mission, it's God's mission. God's doing it, and we have to join in.
Yeah.
And I think maybe this is just one of those times where we all feel we're having to run to work out what God is doing, and kind of where can we join in and find that moment and that space.
I agree, Kate. I think it's very liberating. I wonder if sort of people looking at Christianity from a different point of view would think that this hope in God and trusting that what God is doing is a reason to sort of sit back, be complacent, to go into that, what will be kind of mode, and we don't have to do anything about it. But I think it actually kind of liberates. It stops us thinking, well, there's so much that needs to be done, we can't possibly do it all, so we won't do anything. Whereas actually, I think a kind of trust in and hope in God, and that God will recreate the world in the future. So it's free to say, well, that's great. I mean, that's we can sort of let's get behind that. Let's do what we can do, because we're not carrying everything ourselves. So it's always been, for me, I think it almost feels paradoxical to say, but the great motivation I find is in recognizing I don't have to do everything, and actually the future doesn't depend on me, so I can just get on with doing what I can do. And I think there's been a bit of that sense in what I've seen around as people respond to COVID. Scientists are looking into vaccinations, and we can't all do that. But there's always little bits of things we can do that create some sort of community gathering, and that's felt hopeful.
Yes, and I think certainly seeing people who may not feel able to come out at the moment, but who are taking the time to phone friends and neighbours and family and check in on them. And I think, you know, for even those people who don't feel they can do that or don't feel comfortable doing that, we can pray. We're people of prayer, and we can always use our prayers to be part of God's work in the world. So I think, yeah, it is keeping that hope going. And I think where the Advent image of light and darkness is very helpful as well, is it is sort of directional. It gives you, and people who've heard the other ones are going to have to forgive me if I said this already, but there's something about the light as a focus that means you suddenly, okay, there's a whole load of stuff that perhaps wasn't as important as we thought. Perhaps we don't have to worry as much about that, but we just keep turned towards that light and keep looking at what God's asking of us here and now, even if it's not what God was asking last year, and I'm sure it won't be what God's asking next year. That's both liberating and directional, I suppose. And I love that sense of, and I can't remember who said this now, but, you know, we all, when there's light and dark in the world, all our lives will cast a shadow. There will be, as you shine a light towards something, there's always shadow that falls behind. We then have a choice. Do we spend our time staring at our shadow, or do we turn around and face the light? And I think that for me is something I've always found very helpful, that sense of hope in moving towards the light, because actually we can't control some of those things, but we can control what we're looking at and where we're going with our lives. We can do something about that. So yes, and I have to say, I am one of the things I've shamelessly been relying on that's come up in lots of different ways, funnily enough, is poetry, because I think there's something about that striving to express things that are intangible and hard to express that I think poetry does incredibly well. And we've been sharing some of those as part of this process of Advent as well. So yeah, poetry gives me hope.
Good. Well, I think if you don't mind, that when you mentioned to me that you wanted to have this conversation about hope, my mind went to a poem that I found very helpful, particularly at the moment. And it struck me, Advent always reminds us there are a great wealth and variety of really inspiring images linked to hope that you find about the Old Testament and the New Testament. So great images of images of what God's kingdom will be like in the future, which is the promise that is the secure ground for us. And just thinking about sort of what was needed in the light of COVID, what sort of what hopes have been invested in medicine and in healing and through vaccination. I was reminded of some of the imagery in one of R.S. Thomas's poem, the Welsh priest and poet, and I just thought it'd be I thought it'd be good for us all to maybe hear one of his poems again, where he tries to capture the kingdom. That is the kind of vision of hope that both sort of motivates us and also sets us free from the burden of thinking that all hope depends on what we can do. Do you mind if I read that out?
Please.
Yeah, I've got it to hand. So this is a poem called The Kingdom. It's a long way off, but inside it, there are quite different things going on. Festivals at which the poor man is king and the consumptive is healed. Mirrors in which the blind look at themselves and love looks at them back. And industry is for mending the bent bones and the minds fractured by life. It's a long way off, but to get there takes no time, and admission is free. If you will purge yourself of desire and present yourself with your need only, and the simple offering of your faith, green as a leaf.
Thank you. I love that poem. I love it. I've used it in worship before.
Mm.
And of course, one of the fascinating things about R.S. Thomas is he writes these incredible glimpses into the human heart and soul and into our faith. But from what I understand, I don't think let's put it this way, I don't think I would have wanted him as my parish priest.
That's what I've heard. So I gather as well. I don't think he was
Not really
always the easiest and most temperate of people. But I think it's that. Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, and in a way that kind of reinforces what we were saying, isn't it, about the sense that we all need to respond in the way that we need to respond. It's not, we can't all do everything. We need to share what we can share, and the thought of someone who had that sense of the glimpse of the kingdom and could share that with us and help us to articulate what that might be about.
I think I love as well, there's a very down-to-earth feeling about it, as there is often with R.S. Thomas's poets. It's not, it doesn't feel kind of abstract and unreal and celestial and so on. It's actually all about, it's the bent bones and minds fractured by life. I mean, all of us are often engaged in some sort of work of healing in that, but the idea that the kingdom is all about that, and I find that's, as I say, to sort of go back to what we were saying, but that drives me into wanting to engage in something of that here and now, even if it's partial, provisional, even if, as R.S. Thomas says, things in future will be quite different. Nevertheless, there's a chance to just create a kind of anticipatory glimpse of that through our own little works of healing that don't have to be big and don't have to be grand and don't have to be noticed, but nevertheless play such an important part.
And it is that we've been thinking a lot in Advent about this kind of now but not yet. And I think the poem gets that very well, doesn't it? The kingdom is a long way off, but to take there gets no time. That sense of, I think we find that, don't we, in our life of faith? I certainly do. You can be in the middle of something very mundane, and then something of that kingdom will break through. It might be a conversation, it might be a sudden sense of calm that comes from nowhere, or all those things I think are glimpses of that kingdom where our ideas about status and worth are turned upside down, and that sense of God's love and healing, allowing us to then be the fullest human beings we can be. Exciting stuff. Absolutely. Well, maybe that's what we all just need to be aiming for, whatever this end of Advent brings, because we have a sense, don't we, that Christmas is a very special time, but in a way it's just reminding ourselves of a truth that's there all the time. That sense of God's promises, God's plan of salvation, God's action in the world. We're just remembering it in a particular way.
And although the pandemic and all the restrictions and all the fear and uncertainty that brings is not something I wish in any way at all, nevertheless I think that I wouldn't even call this a silver lining, but I think there's something true about the fact that actually the messages of Advent and Christmas that really are hopeful and really are point us towards what it means to be fully human and fully in relationship do actually come out in a particularly profound way, and a particularly stark way, because of the context in which we're having to celebrate Advent and Christmas this year.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. And speaking of very mundane things, you're going to have to bear with me for about 30 seconds because I've got the dog in the study with me and the dog is demanding to be let out of the study. It's like live television, isn't it? Don't work with animals. I will just go and not work with an animal for 2 seconds. There we are. I've managed to get through 3 conversations so far without that happening. So I'm quite pleased that it made it that long without having to let the dog in and out. But
I remember being part of a conversation where people were trying to decide whether or not the interruptions of life, whether it's the pets or the children, kind of enhance the Zoom conferences or detract from them. And people seem to be 50-50 on this.
I think there's a fine line. I did half think about stopping the recording for a minute, but I thought, do you know what? People know we have a dog. It's fine. So yeah, and actually, it is that sense of sometimes we can make our faith so precious and removed, can't we? We put it in its own little bubble, and it happens over there or in the building. And one of the things of this year, and it may be that in a way our lives have been broken open quite painfully, but that breaking open does allow for new possibilities as well.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I think that's part of the hope. And I think we're on a, I can't bear that phrase that we hear so often at the moment of it's a marathon, not a sprint. But we are, and as Christians, we understand, don't we, that this is a long journey. This is not a quick dash. And my hope, I think, for the church and for God's people in all this is the enormous potential for us to reach out and respond to a world that needs God's love more than ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true, and we will do what we can, I think, and I think we, as we've sort of touched on at different times in this, our calling is just to kind of live faithfully in the midst of it, and not to be driven by an anxiety to try and solve everything, but actually to be, if you like, to try and be the kind of people who just are there alongside and amongst everybody, doing what we can where we can.
I think one of the images that will stay with me for today is that idea of these little islands created out of God's promises. And I think perhaps the thing to remember is those islands aren't physical, are they? I love the sense of the kingdom is a dynamic word. It's not a geographical location. And so, perhaps if we're feeling sort of worried or anxious, we can imagine those islands sort of underneath our feet at where we are, wherever we are. Mm-hmm. We stand on that sense of God's promise. And with that, we can truly go out and be a people of hope for the world.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mike. It's been brilliant to talk to you again. And I'm still hoping we might lure you down to come and do something with us when travel is permissible again.
I'd be delighted to.
And we look forward to seeing you. I look forward to seeing you on Zoom in the near future. But yeah, all the best. And thank you for talking to us about hope today.
I was a privilege to be asked. So thank you, Kate. Thanks very much. And I hope you all at Leighton Buzzard have a wonderful Christmas. In whatever way, shape or form you're unable to take it this time.
Thank you.